Hello, Professor. Our group gonna present Socrates today, and our group member include Mary, Xiaoyi, Virak, Vanita, Sotir, and Mei Mei.
Part of the fascination of Plato's apology consists in the fact that it presents a man who takes extraordinary steps towards his life to be of the greatest possible value to his community, but whose efforts, far from earning him the gratitude and honor he thinks he deserves, leads to his condemnation and death at the hands of the very people he seeks to serve. Socrates is painfully aware that he is a hated figure and that this is what has led him to the accusations against him. He has little money and no political savvy or influence, and he has paid little attention to his family and household, all in order to serve the public that now reveals him. What went wrong and made Socrates such a threat? In this presentation, our team will go over to analyze the apology and trial by Socrates.
Hello, Professor. My name is Vera, and I will be talking about how to live life and die based on Socrates. I will be talking about two quotes from Socrates and talk about how he lives and dies. Based on Socrates, we have to analyze and understand our own life. Based on this quote, unexamined life is not worth living. What this quote is trying to say is that you have to live your life based on your own decision. By decision, Socrates are implying that your decisions are made from your own thoughts and perspective. The Socrates way of living life is based on their own decisions. The hour of departure has arrived, and we go our separate ways. I to die, and you to live. Which of these two is better, only God knows. In this quote, Socrates states that he will die from poisoning, and you to live is forwarded towards kids, telling them to live their life in the way they wanted to. They have a decision and they can decide what to do with their own lives. Socrates had a choice. He was a very wise man and he perfectly understood the options he had. He has been thinking a lot and he has chosen his way himself, choosing to take the poison and to find out what death was like. Probably Socrates acted in this situation by obeying the state laws and also choosing this way himself. With a choice to die, this way or later, maybe it was important to Socrates to have choice and to choose himself his death, not blaming anyone and at the same time not committing suicide, just obeying the state's law. In this case, an unjust law of Athens. The thing that is obvious is that Socrates did not want to preserve his life. He had intentions to find out more and more, and maybe he already knew too much about life, about the limits we have in life, and about the rules we invent and obey. And he was interested in other things. He may have considered new experiences interesting, outrageous, and useful for him, which will not have boundaries, and limits could open new ways of existence or even better, life after death. All in all, I think that Socrates was not right to obey the orders of the state of Athens to take poison. He should have acted to preserve his own life by choosing exile or escaping, as it was more important to save his own life than to obey orders. But it was his decision, and he did not blame anyone. And the important fact that is that Socrates had a choice, and he considered to take a poison as a right decision for himself.
Hello, Professor, and I'm Xiaoyi. I'm gonna present about the apology and what did Socrates say in the apology. Plato's The Apology is one of the most famous and admired texts in world literature. It provides a constant. Many scholars believe that the Athenian philosopher Socrates said in court that he was tried and sentenced to death for trying to discredit and corrupt young people. Also short, it provides an unforgettable portrait of Socrates, who is smart, ironic, proud, humble, confident, and fearless in the face of death. The core of the apology is Socrates' description of his lifestyle. He recounted that his friend Charnapong once asked whether anyone at Delphi Queen Alcohol was smarter than Socrates. Alcohol said no one is. After hearing Socrates' claim, it was shocking because he was keenly aware of his ignorance. He set out to try to prove that Alca was wrong by questioning his Athenians, looking for a truly wise man. But he has been opposite to the same problem. People may be quite familiar with certain special things such as military strategy or shipbuilding, but they have always considered themselves experts in many other things, especially on deep moral and political issues. This makes Socrates unpopular with inorganic people, but he insisted on his mission or his life. He never wanted to make money and he did not participate in politics. He is happy to live in poverty and spend time discussing moral and philosophical issues with anyone willing to talk to him. A jury of 501 Athens citizens convicted Socrates by 281 votes to 220. Socrates was not surprised by the verdict, and he did not make a staged verdict. In any case, he is 70 years old and he will die soon. He said that death is an endless dream like sleep, which is nothing terrible. Or it leads to an afterlife, and he imagines that he will be able to philosophize. The apology can be divided into three parts. The first part is Socrates' own defenses, including the most famous part of the text, that is his account of the alcohol of dolphin, and the part where he interrogates Moritz. The second part is a sentence, and the third part is a sentences too. In the first part, Socrates told the jury at the beginning that their ideas were poisoned by his enemies when they were young and very vulnerable. He said that his reputation for sophistry came from his enemies, and all enemies were jealous of him. He later responded to his accusation of uh, corrupting young people, arguing that deliberate corruption was an incoherent idea. Socrates said that all these false accusations began with his obedience to Delphin's alcohol. Socrates repeats his assertion that the formal accusation will not ruin him, but prejudice, gossip, and slander. He's not afraid of death, because he is more concerned about whether he behaves right or wrong. Furthermore, Socrates argues that those who are afraid of death have shown their ignorance. Death may be a great blessing, but many people are afraid to regard it as a sin when they cannot know it. Socrates once again pointed out that his wisdom lies in his awareness of fact he did not know. Plato never gave the total number of judges for Socrates nor the exact number of people who voted against him and his acquittal. Although Socrates said that if more than 30 people vote for him, then he will be found not guilty. In the second part, the judge decided to impose the death penalty. In the third part, Socrates responded to the verdict. For the first time, he faced those who voted for the death penalty. He claimed that it was not a lack of argument that led to his condemnation, but the lack of time and his unwillingness to condescend to the emotional appeal, and usually any defendant faces the expectation of death. Once and again, he insisted that the prospect of death does not excuse a person from following the path of goodness and truth. For those who voted to declare him innocent, Socrates encouraged them. His God did not stop the way he defended him, which is a sign that it is the right thing to do. Here is a very famous sentence in the Apology: the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. This is technically a shorter paraphrasing of Socrates' statement, I never know nor think that I know. The paraphrased saying, though widely attributed to Plato's Socrates in both ancient and modern times, actually occurs nowhere in Plato's works in precisely the form I know that I know nothing. Evidence that Socrates does not actually claim to know nothing can be found at the Apology 29 BTC, where he claims twice to know something. See also Apology 29d, where Socrates indicates that he is so confident in his claim to knowledge at 29 BC and that he is willing to die for it. That said, in the Apology, Plato relates that Socrates accounts for his seeming wiser than any other person because he does not imagine then he knows what he does not know.
My name is May and I'm going to be presenting what did he do and what did he have to apologize for. The first one is the Aristophanes. The Aristophane was a contemporary of Socrates, and in the play The Clown, which was staged only once in 423 BCE and 24 years before the execution. In The Clown, Socrates is portrayed as a remote, haughty teacher who turned away from the state-supported Greek religion to worship private deities of his own device. In the play, Socrates runs a school called the Thinking Institute that teaches those subversive ideas to young men. At the end, Socrates' school is burned to the ground. Most of the Aristophanes' plays were the satirical puncturing of the Athenian elite, and Socrates were one of his main targets. British classicist Stephen Halliwell, born in 1953, suggests that The Clown was a blend of fantasy and satire that offer a ludicrously distorted image of Socrates and his school. The next one is the Plato. At his trial, Socrates was accused of two things: impiety against Athenian gods by introducing new gods, and the corruption of the Athenian youth by teaching them to question the status quo. He was accused of impiety specifically because the oracle at Delphi said that there are no wiser men in Athens than Socrates, and Socrates knew that he was not wise. After hearing that, he questioned every man he met to find a wiser man than he. The corruption charge said that Socrates, in his defense, was because by questioning people in public, he embarrassed them, and they in turn accused him of corrupting the youth Athenians by the use of his sophistry. The next is Xenophon. In addition, Xenophon reports that while acting as president of the popular assembly, Socrates followed his own principle instead of the will of the people. The bully was a council whose job entailed providing an agenda for the ecclesia, the citizen assembly. If the bull didn't provide an item on the agenda, the ecclesia couldn't act on it, but if they did, the ecclesia was appointed to adjust it. Socrates, said Xenophon, also disagreed on the citizenry, who imagined that the gods are not all knowing. Instead, Socrates thought the gods were omniscient, that the gods were aware of all the things that are said and done, and even things thought about by humans. A critical element that led Socrates' death was his criminal heresy. According to Xenophon, he said, the fact being that with regard to the care bestowed by the gods upon men, his belief differed widely from that of the multitude. The next one is the corrupting the youth of Athens. Finally, by corrupting the young, Socrates was accused of encouraging his student down the path that he chosen, in particular, the one that led him into trouble with the radical democracy of the time. Socrates believed that the ballot box was a stupid way to elect representative. The Apology. In the Apology, Socrates says that Plato is one of the several friends in the audience. In this way, Plato let us know that he has an eyewitness of the trial and therefore is the best possible position to write about it. Plato's speech represents his creative attempt to defend Socrates and his way of life and to condemn those who voted to kill him. In fact, Plato's motive in writing the Apology are likely to have been complex. One of them was to defend and praise Socrates by making use of many of the points Socrates himself had offered in his speech. But as any reader of the work can see, Plato is at the same time using trial and death of Socrates to condemn Athens, to call upon his reader to reject the conventional life that Athens would have preferred Socrates to lead, and to choose instead the life of a Socratic philosopher. In the 4th century BCE, Athens had no norm of accurate reportage or faithful biography, and so Plato would have felt free to shape his material in whatever way suited his multiple aims. Because it was Socrates he wished to praise, he had no choice but to make the Socrates of the Apology close to the original, but he would not have felt bound merely to reproduce, as best he could, the speech that Socrates delivered. I'm certain I'll be explaining the wisdom and virtue of Socrates' truth-telling and his philosophy. Socrates never claimed to be wise, as he was conscious of his own ignorance about higher matter. Thus he had a type of wisdom. Socrates therefore saw it as his responsibility to examine himself and others, that is, to live the life of a philosopher. There are so many virtuous traits in people: fidelity, kindness, and modesty, to name only a few. Throughout history, many thinkers, culture, and creed have emphasized some of those virtues above others, but all cultures agree that there is a good, and all cultures generally agree on virtue, even if they go by different name or hold different weight. We come to know the phrase that an unexamined life is not worth living. Toward the end of his trial, Socrates believed that the purpose of life was to grow spiritually and philosophically. He argued that it was important to question and examine your values and beliefs in order to determine they were the correct ones. Socrates' ways of examining people was by using this method, elenchus, in other words, the Socratic method. He believed that this method made people more aware of their ignorance and therefore lead to humility and modesty. The Socratic method was not necessarily used to determine what is not true, but rather to determine what cannot be true. Thus, this method was used throughout the Socratic dialogue. For Socrates, this method of determining what is and what is not true occur always in the context of discourse and dialogue with others. According to Socrates, virtue is knowledge, because all living things aim for the perceived good. And therefore, if anyone does not know what is good, he cannot do what is good, because he will always aim for mistaken target. But if someone knows what is good, he will do what is good, because he will aim for what is good. Socrates believed that philosophy was an improvement of the soul as it revealed our ignorance. Therefore, it is important to live an examined life. He believed that you will most likely lead a miserable life if you did not question your belief and ideas. Socrates always claimed that he did not know anything. This resonates the essence of what Socrates is about. Wisdom is a sort of recognition of your own ignorance. Thus, Socrates knows that he is not wise. Therefore, he has a type of wisdom. The principle of Socrates' irony also implies that only true knowledge and wisdom can lead to right action. The most important condition of being a good human being is to possess the right of knowledge and act accordingly. Socrates formulated this with a key definition: virtue is knowledge. There is no virtue without the knowledge of the truth. If we want to lead a good life in moral sense of the term, we have to know the truth. Morality begins with intellectual uprightness. Hello, Professor. I am Mary, and I will be going over what made Socrates such a threat. First is the public's hatred of Socrates over his criticism of democracy. Socrates' analysis of the hatred he has towards democracy incurred in one part of a larger theme that he dwells on throughout his speech. Athens is a democracy, a city in which the many are the dominant power in politics, and it can therefore be expected to have all the vices of the many. Because most people hate to be tested in arguments, there will always be action of some sort against those who provoke them with questions. But that is not the only accusation Socrates brings forward against his city and his politics. He tells his democratic audience that he was right to have withdrawn from political life, because a good person who fights for justice in a democracy will be killed. In his cross examination of Meletus, he insists that only a few people can acquire the knowledge necessary for improving the young of many species, and that the many will inevitably do a poor job. He criticizes the assembly for its illegal actions, and that the Athenian courts for the ease with which matters of justice are distorted by emotional pleading. Socrates implies that very nature of democracy makes it a corrupt political system. Better experience has taught him that most people rest content with superficial understanding of the most urgent human questions. When they are given great power, the shallowness inevitably leads to injustice. Next is his reconception of piety. Socrates' reconception of piety must have struck his fellow citizens as all the more bizarre and threatening because it was accompanied by his unapologetic and beautiful acceptance of the divine sign, which Meletus ridicules, a voice that has come to him since childhood, warning him away from certain undertakings, and in doing so giving him unfailing advice. In Xenophon's Apology, Socrates seeks to portray the daemon that guides him as phenomenon akin to others, with which his fellow citizens are quite familiar, quoting, "Those who rely on bird calls and the utterness of men are, I suppose, receiving guidance from voices. Can there be any doubt that the thunder has a voice, or that is or that it is an omen of the greatest significance? End quote. But an Athenian of the conventional piety would have been able to spot the weakness of his attempt to assimilate Socrates' divine voice for the experience of a seer who makes predictions based on the interpretation of nature phenomena. Such seers were appointed and regulated by civic procedures. Socrates was not designated by the city to serve in an official religious capacity, and therefore, in claiming to have experiences that put him directly in touch with the divine, he was circumventing the normal route by which citizens gained access to sources of religious inspiration. The Socrates of Plato's Apology, unlike that of Xenophon's, makes no attempt to portray his divine sign as a phenomenon that can create no rift or distance between him and others. On the contrary, he attributes his decisions not to participate in the political life of the community beyond the minimal duties of citizenship to the influence of his divine sign, and he is confident that his decision to come to court and contest the charges against him was the right one because he was not opposed by the divine sign. The daemon Socrates listened to is a divinity that makes a political difference. It tells him what kind of relationship he should have with his fellow citizens and how he should conduct himself in public affairs. Thus, not only does Socrates have an unorthodox conception of piety and of what God wants from the citizen of the city, he also claims to receive infallible guidance from a voice that does not hesitate to speak to him about public matters. Next is the dangers posed by Socrates. An open-minded and conscientious member of the jury could therefore have come to the conclusion that Socrates posed a significant threat to the city and should be found guilty of the charges against him. In a way, Socrates did fail to acknowledge the gods recognized in the city. He did introduce new gods, and by teaching these things to the young who gathered around him, he did corrupt them. He may have referred to the god or the gods, but his conception of what is involved in attending to the god was utterly novel and politically dangerous. The fact that Socrates saw his piety as a genuine article, unreflective virtue of his fellow citizens as false virtue, indicates that he took the entire religious life of Athens, no less than its political life, to be unworthy of a good man. If there is any doubt that the unorthodox form of piety Socrates embodies could have brought him into direct conflict with the popular will, one need only think of the portion of Plato's Apology in which Socrates tells the junior jurors that he would obey the god rather than them. Imagining the possibility that he is acquitted on the condition that he sees philosophizing in the marketplace, he unequivocally rejects the terms on his hypothetical offer, precisely because he believes that his religious duty to call his fellow citizens to the examined life cannot be secondary to any other consideration. But there was no need for him to have admitted in such explicit terms that his conception of piety might require, in certain circumstances, to disobey a civic order. It is characteristic of his entire speech that he brings into the open how contemptuous he is of Athenian civic life and his fellow citizens. He prides himself on the fact that he will say nothing to curry favor with the jurors or to conceal his attitude of superiority to him, even though he realizes that this is likely to lead to some of them to vote against him out of resentment. Others may throw themselves on the pity of the jury to bring their tearful children and friends to court, but these typical modes of behavior corrupt the legal system, and Socrates will not stoop to such tactics. Here, as in so many parts of his speech, he treats his day in court as an opportunity to counter-indict his accusers and his fellow citizens, or for the way they indeed lead their lives. Another example, after he has seen found guilty and has opportunity to propose a punishment, he tells the jury that he should receive free meals for the remainder of his life, because this is what he deserves, though in the end he offers to pay 1 mina of silver, equivalent to about 100 days' wages, a penalty that his wealthy friends attending the trial increased to 30 minas. In effect, Socrates uses the occasion of this trial to put his accusers and jurors on trial, but this was a natural role for him because he had done the same thing day after day to everyone he met. Hello.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Vinita, and I'll be talking about a legacy.
Socrates is a Greek philosopher of Athens who is generally regarded as one of the wisest people of all time. Socrates himself left no writings, and most of our knowledge of him and his teaching comes from the dialogue of his most famous pupil, Plato, and from the memoirs of Xenophon. Socrates is unique among the great philosophers in that he is portrayed and remembered as quasi-saint or religious figure. Indeed, nearly every school of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, from the skeptics to the Stoics to the Cynics, desired to claim him as one of their own. Since all that is known of his philosophy is based on the writing of others, the Socratic problem or Socratic question reconstructing the philosopher's belief in full and exploring any contradictions in second-hand account of them, and remains an open question facing scholars today. Socrates and his followers expanded their purpose of philosophy from trying to understand the outside world to trying to tease apart one's inner value. His passion for the definition and hair-splitting question inspired the development of formal logic and systematic ethics from the time of Aristotle through the Renaissance and into the modern era. Moreover, Socrates' life became an example of the difficulties and the importance of living. In 1791, autobiography Benjamin Franklin reduced his notion into a single line: humility, imitate Jesus and Socrates. Some of Socrates' famous quotes include the only true wisdom is in knowing you, knowing nothing. There is and another one is that there is only one good knowledge and one evil ignorance. According to Plato, Socrates' life ends is marked by his execution by Greek authorities for corrupting the minds of youth and challenging the legitimacy of the gods, as well as the established authority of the aristocracy of Greek society of the day. Both Plato and Xenophon wrote works describing the last day of Socrates and the trial specifically, where Socrates attempts to defend himself and his position as simply a seeker of wisdom and a man of virtue, almost insisting his accuser to sentence him to death rather than banish him to some foreign land. Socrates then personifies what we conceive today as the prototypical classical philosopher, despite the contribution of the intellectual and thinkers that came before him. However, what the ancient considered philosophy and what we consider philosophy today, and in turn metaphysics, which was a term first used by Aristotle, are conceptually similar but at the same time very different things. The ancient Greeks devised and understand the term philosophy, the first use of which is attested and attributed to Pythagoras, covered a much broader range of topics and branches of thought than the modern conception of the terms. Good morning.
That's our Socrates presentation. Thank you for your listening.